Recording started.
Okay, so this is Biml, the next step in Agile data warehousing. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so one of my favorite movies is The Matrix, and I think it's it's a favorite movie of a lot of geeks. And to me, what the movie is about Neo, who's a brilliant guy, but who is bored and kind of depressed, and he is looking for something. He knows that there's something wrong with his environment. He doesn't know what it is, but he does know that there's got to be some way to get more out of it, to be more productive, to be more efficient, to gain better control over his environment. Until, some point in the movie, he realizes that he's the one, and he can see the code. Instead of seeing what other people see, the agents, he sees their code. And in doing that, he can stop bullets and fly and do all sorts of other wonderful things. So what does this have to do with what I'm talking about? Well, Biml is the code. If you do data warehousing, if you do ETL for a living, and to a limited extent other disciplines too, just things that involve SQL Server, you can use Biml to see the code. You become the one, and you can harness that power yourself. So who am I? My name is David Stein. I'm a data warehouse architect in Dallas. I've been up a couple of times for SQL Saturdays in Oklahoma. I blog as madetomentor.com, and my Twitter is @madetomentor. I was the technical reviewer for that book, SSIS 2012 Design Patterns, and it is also one of the few books that has anything written in it so far on Biml. There's a whole chapter devoted to Biml, and these are the folks who wrote it, some of whom I'm sure you know of and have met. As I said before, I'm independent, so I'm always looking for cool and interesting projects, especially things that I can apply Biml on. I also do Biml quick starts where I go into somebody's environment and teach them how to use Biml in a couple of days using their own packages and their own code. So, little disclaimer here. Because I am so pumped and so excited about Biml, because I know what it can do, I can sometimes come off sounding like an infomercial. I really can't help it. I've tried to, friends of mine have said things to me about it. Hey, Dave, you sound like you're trying to sell me a used car, right? But I really can't help it because I know what it can do. I'm making it do magic every day. But the risk is that you come off sounding like the sham wow guy, and then nobody really internalizes what you say. So I figured I would start with a disclaimer that, hey, I do really love this stuff. I'm really excited about this stuff. But seriously, a serious disclaimer is, I don't profit in any way whether you adopt Biml or not. I don't work for Verigence, which is the company that created Biml. If you choose to buy a product from Verigence, it doesn't matter to me. There's no coupon code where I get credit or something. I'm telling you these things because they are hugely powerful and they are changing the way we do our work. So, this all started with the Agile Data Warehouse Design book. Lawrence Core wrote this book. A friend of mine, Tim Costello in Dallas, came to me some time ago and said, Dave, you got to read this book. It's awesome. And I read it, and it was great. It's all about quick iterations with a process that they call model storming, which is business process interviews in a very targeted way, where you engage business people for relatively short periods of time in a prescribed way with either whiteboards or spreadsheets, but not your typical thing that you would see people doing when they do data modeling. It's more targeted towards the business. It's just-in-time modeling. So you are only modeling those entities that you need at that moment, and really only to the extent that you need them at that moment. So if you don't need all of those columns about a customer, they're not there. You're only putting in the things that you absolutely need at that time. One of the reasons is because requirements change so fast. So if you spend forever in the requirements gathering phase in a project, chances are by the time you get to the end, the person who asked for a lot of this stuff isn't there anymore. or perhaps the business needs changed, or any number of issues. The quicker you can do these iterations, the more accurate what you're building is, and the less, I stole this off a website about it, the less wastage there is. So you don't spend time building things that either don't matter anymore or that you misunderstood because you weren't an expert on that particular business itself, maybe an expert in dimensional modeling, but you may not have gotten what they were trying to tell you. So that's all well and good, and that would be Agile, right? That's all well and good, except it doesn't really work. And the reason it doesn't work, or at least it didn't work, is not the fault of model storming or that whole process. It's all well and great. The problem is it's not the most painful part of the process. So if you try and do iterative work, if you think you're going to build rudimentary dimensions and then add things to them, and then we'll worry about type 1, type 2 dimensions later, and then we'll do this and we'll do that, you find that the amount of time that you spend doing your ETL is just cost prohibitive, and you really can't be Agile. You're forced to try and go somewhere down the middle where you try and do the whole thing where you try and deliver some value quickly so they'll give you time so you can go back and fix everything. Is basically how it works, at least as it did until recently. However, now we have Biml. Biml stands for Business Intelligence Markup Language. It is a human-readable XML language, and unlike a lot of the XML that we look at, like DTSX packages and SSIS, this one really is human-readable. And that's an example of right there that came off of my blog. If you just look through there, you could see a package that's named Hello World. It has an execute SQL task in it named SQL Hello World with a connection that's named there and a direct input. And so you can read that. Most of Biml, if you've done work in SSIS, almost all of the Biml examples that you'll see, you could look through there and know exactly what they are. And so it's an incredibly, it's usability-wise, it's head and shoulders above the XML that's in DCSX packages. So why do we care? Well, they compile into views, tables, packages, and cubes. Now, SSIS and SSAS are great tools. They're highly visual. They are made for beginners. So you see a lot of menu-driven interface, a lot of click and drag, you see wizards and all that. And when I was trying to gain a mastery of SSIS, I went and took classes with a lot of the masters, some of the people who wrote that book. And what I realized after I merely became competent, not mastery, just competency with SSIS, was that those masters were not appreciably faster than I was. They were somewhat faster, but the guy who does 100 packages or the guy who's done 10,000 packages, the guy who's done 10,000 packages may only be 10% faster than the guy who's done 100. So it would be like Luke and Yoda only being 10% stronger or more powerful than Luke is, and that just doesn't make sense. But with Biml and Biml script, the master, the smartest guy wins. The master can greatly increase his productivity, several orders of magnitude, to such an extent that you wouldn't believe it. And that's where we start bordering on, hey, I'll sell you a set of steak knives, and if you dial the next 10 minutes, it sounds like an infomercial, but I'm telling you, it's reality. So SSAS and SSIS are completely different. Anybody who's done a lot of work with the Microsoft stack will know that the way that SSAS, SSIS, and SSRS, the way the philosophy of the tools is totally different. The expression languages are totally different. If you need to go into your data warehouse and change something, you also have to go in and change your DDL, then you have to go in and change your SSIS packages separately and your SSAS cubes separately. None of this really interconnects and talks. The reason they made those tools that way is so they can be piecemeal adopted. People can decide to use SSAS or SSAS. Did I say SSAS twice? Sorry. SSIS or SSAS or vice versa, right? Code reuse. So 2012 has come a long way in its code reuse. You can actually successfully copy and paste things. In 2008 R2, when you would copy and paste things even from within the same package, they would go way off into right field, and you'd spend days trying to drag them back over into the data flow, right? 2012 is better, and also 2012 has templates, and those are great. And a lot of us have adapted. We use frameworks that do extra logging, and so you'll open your template package, and inside of there will be a bunch of execute SQL tests that handle logging, and then you'll have a sequence container, and then you just put your data flows or whatnot in the sequence container. That's all well and wonderful until you have 100 of those, 500 of those in production, and you realize you need to change something. And then it isn't so wonderful anymore, because what are you going to do? You're going to open those 100 packages and make that one change over and over and over again? Are you going to risk and use like a text editor, find and replace, and hope that works? Right? It's not so wonderful anymore. Biml script fixes that. Source control. So I wish we were in the same room so we could do a show of hands and all that, but source control in 2008 in R2 was abysmal for SSIS, just abysmal. Every time you opened the package, the entire XML seemed to reorder itself. So when you're using the standard tools, which basically work on text differences, it was impossible to tell what had changed at all. 2012 is somewhat better, but if you have you have a project and you have multiple people working on it, and you have a package, and you're trying to, even at the project level, make changes in such a way that everybody's changes get checked in, can be darn near impossible. So if with Biml script, I can take a model, a data model, and put metadata in it, and we'll go into this in a little bit, in a little more detail. And all of my structures, going back, all of my staging tables in various databases or whatnot, the user views that I put over the top of my data warehouse tables, all of my packages, if those are generated by my code dynamically, what do you check into source control? Well, the model and your Biml scripts, and that's it. You literally don't have to check in more than that, and you should see the looks I get from my customers when I explain that to them. Some of them are still checking in their packages and their views and all their stuff just simply because it makes them feel better. But I don't know why. You're generating them dynamically. You can push a button and regenerate them. So source control is a huge benefit with Biml. Plus, if you have people who are editing Biml scripts or just Biml, the changes are human readable. So if I'm trying to check something in and somebody else is trying to check something in, I can easily tell and then merge those two changes together. So why use Biml Part 2? Well, it's not proprietary. It's an open spec, which means that anybody can develop software for it and charge for it if they want to. Any software that creates it or consumes it. In fact, one of my clients and I worked on this project called BimlGen. It's on GitHub. I'll be putting it up on the blog with a link and explanations. But basically what you do is you point that at a database, and it reverse engineers the database tables and their relationships into Biml. And that's a valuable service for free, right? And anybody can do so. The compiler is free. BIDS helper is free. And most people have done ETL for any length of time, have used BIDS helper at one time or another. It's a great free CodePlex open source add-on for SSDT or BIDS. And it will compile your Biml for you. It also has a certain amount of IntelliSense in it to assist you in writing it. There are no no server installs or licensing. Even if you choose to use the third-party product created by Verigence called Mist, more on that in a little bit, you don't have to install anything on the server. You're creating genuine views, genuine tables, genuine packages and cubes. In fact, if you're careful about the way you use your framework and you do your framework, you literally can't tell when you open those things that I didn't make them manually. You literally can't tell. And quite often, I don't even bring it up to clients. because they're usually, by the time they call somebody like me, they're usually in pain, they've got a project that's gone over, and they don't want to do any of that Biml stuff or that experimental stuff or whatnot. Well, I don't care. I'll do it with Biml and then deliver the end product to you. You can't tell the difference. There's no way to tell the difference. And immediately afterwards, after I've given you your packages or whatnot, somebody can open it and start adding to them and making changes directly in SSIS. Now, it's not magic. So if you're using another third-party tool like Cozy Rock or something, you're still going to have to do whatever licensing they request or they require. It emits SQL 2005 through 2014 objects from the same Biml scripts and the same metadata. So if you're one of those people who's offering data warehousing as a service to clients and you're not sure what versions they're going to be using, suddenly you don't have to maintain all these separate code bases. It's all the same code. You just change a setting and say, yeah, I want to do 2008 R2 packages today. Now, once again, it's not magic. So if you're using something like merge, T-SQL merge in 2008, if you try and push that to 2005, it's not suddenly going to make a 2005 server understand merge. But if you're doing stuff that works throughout the whole stack, it doesn't make any difference where you're pushing it. You can have a SQL server that's 2008 R2 and an SSIS 2005 server and a 2012 SSAS server. It doesn't make any difference. Flexibility. I'm on the bleeding edge when it comes to this stuff. So I am doing automatic generation of tables and views and packages and all that stuff based on metadata. So I'm really deep into this stuff. But you don't have to be. You can dip your toe in and only do things like automatic generation of staging tables. They have a known pattern where you can just replace certain variables with certain values and it'll look at your database, take the tables that are necessary out, generate them in a staging area, and generate the SSIS packages to load them. And then you can go in there and edit them and say, yeah, but we do our date increments on this, or we do it via row versions, or whatever. So there's various levels, and you can go in very shallow if you want and still get a lot of value out of this. Biml script. So up until this point, we've been talking about Biml. And if I told you that you could create packages by typing this stuff into BIDS helper, you'd say, well, that's all right, I guess, but it's probably not that much faster than SSIS. Well, it actually is, but it's still not the big wow. The wow is when you use code to automate this process, to loop through tables to create the packages, to do all these things for you, where suddenly you're pumping out 10, 20 fact tables at a time. So when we're talking about Biml script, I make this distinction, but a lot of people don't. But let me explain it. Biml script versus scripting Biml. When people start doing this, they start thinking about, well, Biml is text. I mean, it's XML, and therefore text. I can just do text manipulation. I can put some kind of engine in front of it and then generate Biml objects, tables, and such that way. And you'll see people doing that with PowerShell and people doing that with T-SQL, and some people are actually doing it with Excel. And they start that way because it seems like it's easier, but it's not. It's very limiting. You're much better using Biml script. Biml script involves embedded nuggets of .NET code into the existing Biml. It looks a lot like websites with HTML and ASP.NET. You have these XML elements. Now in a website you might see like a header or body or even like H3 and \H3 and all that stuff. Then in there's ASP code that loops through your item master or your what you're selling or whatever and creates rows with checkboxes and things like that. So it's an analogous to that, but what you're really doing is you're using LINQ, language integrated query, and C# or VB.NET and metadata. Now, a little word about this. You can do this with VB.NET. I'm a VB programmer from way back. I sold my first piece of commercial software at age 11 on basic, not Visual Basic, basic. But when I started getting into Biml scripting, I went C#. And the reason is because 90% of the examples you see out there where you can take people's code and manipulate it are in C#. And so if you want to do this, I would highly recommend that you just drink the Kool-Aid and start learning C#. It's not that bad. It really isn't. So we're using C# or VB.NET and metadata. Now, metadata. There are several options for your metadata. The first thing I'd like to talk about is convention versus configuration. There are people who are doing Biml scripting, and what they're doing is that they are making them highly, highly, highly configurable, so that way all of the values that would ever be needed in the Biml script to generate packages like for lookups for fact tables and such are all there. And all you do is just loop through this table. Well, that's all well and wonderful, except somebody has to put those values in that table. So the more configuration you allow in your script, the more complex the script is, and the more complex the metadata has to be to support it. I prefer convention. Anybody who's worked with me knows that I'm exceedingly anal about the way I write code and about the way I do packages. Things are named the same way every time. There's a certain pattern that I use that I have found to be the best. So I use these conventions in my Biml script. And so therefore, when you look at some of my Biml script, you'll be like, I can't believe you got all that done with that little bit of code. And one of the reasons is because of the way I'm using conventions. Metadata tables is one of the common sources that people use. They actually have physical SQL Server tables that they keep this metadata in, and it kind of looks like source to target mapping in spreadsheets. You'll see something like that, where you have the source information, the destination information, and then the functioning of the columns or the tables in those tables like that. Sometimes they'll have one for facts, and sometimes they'll have one for dimensions. They'll separate them. SQL Server database schemas is another place where you can get your metadata. Now, by that I mean you can loop through your dimensions and handle them a certain way simply because they are dimensions, right? You can key off of things like foreign keys and then start triggering lookups by foreign keys, things like that. Also, people are using tables and column naming to do this. So they would require that a dimension actually start with the letters DIM, so they know it's a dimension, or fact, if it's a fact. I tend not to do that. Also, column naming, so they'll have things like, at one time Kimball was recommending that if you had a customer dimension, then the surrogate key, the primary key of the customer dimension, would be customer_SK. And then in the fact table, you'd see customer_SK. And then for business key, you'd have _BK, or AK for alternate key, which I really disliked because then you spend forever explaining to the users what customer AK means. It means alternate key. What does that mean? Business key. Okay, good. Because I'm a consultant and I work on other people's stuff, I can't rely on the fact that I can change the naming to make it work for me. And to be honest with you, I don't like to intrude on my users. I like the users to be able to have the most clutter-free and simplest user experience they can have. So I tend to hide my metadata in extended properties. Extended properties are becoming more and more popular for doing your documentation. So you'll see extended properties at the table level, at the column level. Sometimes you'll see them on views and things like that. And the great thing is it's actually part of the SQL Server database, and it's backed up. And I do that very thing. But I also use the Biml object model and annotation tags, which I will show you in a minute. Annotation tags are these little descriptors that you can put on things like tables and columns, really any Biml object, and then have your C# or your VB.NET look for certain values and key off of them. And so this is the method I'm going to show you right now. Now, these screenshots are from a product called ModelWrite. Can you guys read that? I hope you can. It's hard to tell with the resolution we're working at. This is ModelWrite, but I know for a fact you can do the same thing with the ER Studio. One of my friends is, and I'm just waiting for the next project where I'm going to use ER Win, and then I'll set up a customization to do that too. But this is a simple table, and if you look at the column role in that table there, well, there's your SK, surrogate key, business key, type 1, type 2, okay? And the box on top of there is actually where in the menu you would select those. The table type is for the table extended properties. Don't worry about dim lookup type. It'll be on the blog, and I'll explain it there. It'll take too long in this webcast. And then I have just Biml to be processed. Biml to be processed simply means when this object gets into Biml, I want you to run script on it. If it was a custom situation where there's no way with this table that my Biml script can interpret it properly, then I will make that false. It'll get imported into the project, but it won't have any custom scripts run on it. And then you have the column user-defined properties, which are below that. Column role is things like business key, surrogate key, type 1, type 2. I have column roles for my auditing, row start date, row end date, rows current, those kinds of things. User view includes. I always generate views on top of my data warehouse tables. And this is a way that I can dynamically make sure that certain columns, one at a time if I want, specific columns, never make it into the user views. Or you could have a setting that says, hey, I have this auditing column that ends up in my, has to be in the data warehouse, but it never means anything to the users. You could just say, this one's always no. And therefore, when you generate your views, it doesn't show up. So that's the first step. The second step is that the tool generates extended properties from those values. So as you look at that, you'll see that it's for dim product, and the value of that extended property of table type is that it's a dimension. And then the next one is for one of the columns. The column is part number, and it's the business key, or at least part of the business key. Now, you could say, well, I don't have to type all that in. I don't type any of that. The tool generates that. So then, as I run the create statement for dim product, it adds the extended properties. And then step 3, oh, that's bad. Huh. My method step 2 and another method step 2. That's great. My method step 3 is I have a Biml script that I'm going to share on the blog early next week that looks at the database and imports the structures correctly into Biml, and also changes these column role and user view includes. Those are the extended properties. And then it comes into Biml as annotation tags. And then my code that generates all these things, creates the tables, creates views, creates packages, looks for these annotations on the tables and the columns. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm not going to bring up the modeling tool over and over and over again, because we're going to do 2 very rapid iterations through a warehouse. I'm going to simply start with the transact SQL with the extended properties. But I wanted you to know what we're doing. Now, this is magic. And the reason I say this is I would love to be able to sit down and go through all the Biml scripts and explain all the for each statements and how they work and talk about C# overloads and all that stuff. But we don't have time. We only have an hour and a half. So what I'm doing is I am running these scripts so that you can see how these things can be dynamically generated, quote unquote, magically. But I'm doing it kind of like Penn and Teller because I'm in the middle of this blog series where I'm putting the scripts up and explaining to you how the magic works. So that's why I use this kind of metaphor for it. So the scene for this little demo is we have been brought into a failing data warehouse project. And you've heard the statistics about how likely these things are to fail. So when you're a consultant, they hardly ever bring you in the beginning and let you greenfield everything, right? Because if they often won't allow you to build the whole thing because it would cost a great deal of money at your hourly rate. They call you when it fails. So we've been brought in and they've been working on this thing for a year and spent $1 million and have all this documentation and nothing to show for it. And the business people are unwilling to spend time with you. And this happens a lot because they already spent weeks of their time with Bob and never got any reports out of it. So they're unwilling to spend this time, but yet we have to engage them because we don't want to waste our time reading a year-old documentation that could have been created by somebody who didn't understand data warehousing. So how do we do that? Well, we get quick wins and we deliver value very, very rapidly. This gets the buy-in from the business. The faster you can get metrics back to the users after they have spent their time with you, the better the training, the better the behavior is, the better it is, and they will participate better, they will pay attention better and give you their best input because they know tomorrow Dave's going to come in with a data warehouse. And I want to make sure it's right. Otherwise I got to answer to my boss. So how are we going to do that? Well, in a perfect world, we would just make one table, right? Really, the users don't care what the model looks like anyway. They don't care. They care about metrics. They care about their reports. They care about the analysis. They could care less. If you were going to use some kind of big data strategy and make it a gigantic table, they wouldn't care that there weren't facts and dimensions separated with proper foreign keys and, they don't care. They just care that they got their metrics. So in a perfect world, you would make a table, and then you would, step 2, make some rudimentary dimensions, right? And then in step 3, you might add more to those dimensions, or you might add a different dimension like salesperson, or separate out the date dimension if you were going to do that, or have an address dimension, or whatnot, right? So we are going to rapidly iterate through these things, and what you're going to see is you're going to see Biml scripts literally create this. Now the basic pattern that we're looking at is we have an interim table that corresponds to the destination table. This is the classic T-SQL merge pattern. So if I have a DIM customer, I have a similar table, not quite identical, but a similar table that is interim.dim customer. I chose the schema interim. It's just something I like to do because when I see staging, you never know whether the staging is temporary staging or durable staging. But to me, interim, that's where the records go in the interim. So it denotes in somebody's mind, this is temporary. So if you're doing an incremental load, the only records that are in interim.dim customer are the changed records since the last load. So we typically truncate the interim table. Then we have a data flow that may or may not contain transforms to change the data. Then we drop those in the interim table, and then we do a T-SQL merge. Okay, so once again, another disclaimer. I do not work for Verigence. I do not profit if you buy Mist. I am doing this demo in Mist, although all of it can be written and done in BIDS Helper. I'm doing it in Mist because Mist is visual and it's instantaneous, and I have several magic tricks to show. And if I were to do those in BIDS Helper, I would have to go faster, and it would be even harder to follow than it is in Mist. So I'm showing it in Mist, but every one of these things will run in BIDS Helper, and I could have written all of them in BIDS Helper. After that disclaimer, let me just say this. Mist is a third-party product. It's not inexpensive, but it's worth it. I buy it because although you can write all these things in BIDS Helper, I wouldn't want to. It takes a long time. And you can see some of that on my blog on the Hello to the World of Biml article where I start typing this stuff in, and then when I start showing Biml script, you will see what happens to your IntelliSense when you start writing Biml script in today's Thursday, so it'll probably be on Wednesday of next week. But certainly all this stuff can be consumed with BIDS Helper, and you can write it with BIDS Helper if you have the patience. So let's get to the demo. I'm going to switch over to Mist. And how does that look to you guys, since we had to change the resolution?
Good. Good.
Okay. I don't want you to get a bad impression of the product either. Normally I'm using this on a high definition monitor, so therefore I can see the whole script and I can see multiple windows. This is going to be a little pinched, but that's not typically what the user experience is like. Okay, so I have a missed project with nothing more than two connections defined in it, the data warehouse and the source. This is kind of in the magician thing, this is the let's look up my sleeve, okay? Two databases, the data warehouse and the source, and three schemas of DBO, interim, which I told you about, and star. One of my previous projects is kind of a little inside joke. One of my previous projects was a failed data warehouse that I was running in the middle of it, and they actually, I thought it was really cute. In their data warehouse, they had a STAR schema, and they put all of their facts and dimensions inside the star schema. And I just thought that was cute, so I used this for my views. I wouldn't do this in production or anything, but I just thought it was cute. Okay, and that's all there is. So if you look through here, other than my Biml scripts, there's nothing else here, okay? So, and those, by the way, all come from this environment, which is up here. Here's the two connections, here's the two databases, and here's the schemas. And it's all human readable. The only thing you can't see is the connection strings for the connections. All right, now let us go down and run this import tables with extended properties. Well, first what we have to do is I have to show you what's up my sleeve with my data warehouse. So if I go in here and can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
And I try and expand tables, nothing happens because there are no tables in there. Oh, I lied. Now there are no tables in there. Okay. Okay, so there are no tables in there. All right. I'm going to run this script, which is actually going to drop the database and create a single table, a single fact table. Let's run that, and then let's just go through the script so you can see it. It's a simple fact-like table. There are no dimensions, so therefore calling it a fact is kind of a misnomer. Here's all the extended properties. And remember, I didn't write any of this. This came out of the modeling tool. And should be a clustered index and then a couple of select statements, and that's it. So then if I refresh this, nothing up my sleeve. There's one table in here with 0 records, right? I'm going to go over to my Biml, and I'm going to run this Biml script. And it imported a fact table. And I can open it up. Now, this part you don't get in BIDS Helper. You don't get a nice little interface with, you know, a GUI and all that, right? But I can open it up and look at the Biml. And these are columns with, here I'm pointing at my screen like you guys can see me point. Here are the columns and the column roles. Those are the extended properties that were imported as annotation tags. Okay? And so I only have the one table. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to shrink this so I can actually see a little bit of this. And I am going to look at my interim staging tables, generate interim staging tables. I'm going to go over to, God, this resolution is killing me. All right, so I'm going to turn this on live. And what that means is it just runs live in Mist. And as soon as I do, it just created a virtual interim fact sales order details table for me right here. So this is the staging table for my fact. Now, people will say, why are you using staging tables and merging T-SQL with fact tables? There's a very good reason. I know that they say, you know, if it's a transactional fact table, you should never get those records again, but they always seem to come back again. Somebody makes a fix, somebody does something, and you'll get it again. So I'm using the same pattern in this particular framework for the fact table for the merge as I am for the dimensions. So I have a table, but I also want to generate my views. So I will go over here and turn that on to live. And these are These scripts in here are literally Biml scripts. You have C# in here. Okay? It's not that I have programmed it in there to make that view with that name with those columns. It is dynamically making it based upon metadata. So now when I go back over here, it shows two tables. Unfortunately, MIST and Biml look at views as if they are tables. So that's why I've used a separate schema, and I've actually appended the letters VW to it. But when I generate it, it will create a view. Now, the thing is, I've created these tables, but I haven't created them in the database. So I go in here and I have the generate interims, tables, and views package. When I make this live, I go back over, and now suddenly if I go down to packages, I've got a package. Well, let's look at that. In the visual view here, auto layout, oh, there we go. You'll see that it created an execute SQL task for the view, which will run in just a minute, and it created the table for the interim. Let's look at that really quick. I put that down because there we go. So if we're on the view, if you go down here, you'll see if exists, select blah 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 from here where the view name equals this and it's a view, drop the view, and then create the view. Do you see how it lists all the columns dynamically? It did that based upon my C#. So if I were to go in there and change one of these column names in my table, all this stuff automatically changes. And the table statement will be the create table statement will be very similar too. If this exists, drop the table, recreate the table. All right, so I'm going to cheat and save time. I am going to tell MIST to just build and run this. Normally I would build this, have it open in bids or in SSDT, and then run the packages. And we'll do that in a minute to some other packages, but this is just a shortcutting mechanism so I can get there faster. So if I go over to my query tool and I refresh, suddenly I'm going to have a DBO, fax sales order details, and interim fax sales order details, and if I open views, the view. Now let's go back and do a little more magic. So we've taken care of the plumbing, we've taken care of the tables that are required to load and use it. Well, let's just create the package. All right, I'm done. There's your package. The truncate statement, the source. Let me hit auto layout here. There we go. The source goes into the interim table for fax sales order details, and then it merges. So let's just build that. Right click, right click. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. On the package, right click and say, let's build an open in bids. Come on. It'll take a second. It's SSDT opening. And by the way, if you run this on a good quality desktop machine with a lot of RAM, it's a lot faster. I'm running this on my Ultrabook because I didn't want to have to worry about trying to exclude certain screens from my multi-screen desktop machine. This is probably 5 times longer than it takes on my desktop dev machine. Okay, and it accidentally loaded. One second here. Dropbox. I regenerated part of this project output. Let me delete that. Sorry, one second. This is that pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Let's do it again. It had like residual DBO, DIM customer stuff in it. build and open in bids. Now it should only have that one table. So it's going to load this, and it's going to create the truncate the interim. It's going to create the data flow. It's going to create all that stuff. I can open the package. Has the sources. There we go. Truncate statement is very simple. Truncate table, blah, blah, blah. The data flow, in this case, there were no lookups or anything. Remember, this is just a flat table that we are designating as a fact table, but it has no lookups. So it's just a source to destination. You can look at the destination over here and see that things are mapped, right? And then we have a SQL merge statement, which probably doesn't fit really well on screen over there. But this is a merge statement. I have the pattern done where it does type 1, type 2, and type 1 and 2. So either one or both. And it has explicit transactions and some rudimentary error handling. And so I can go over here and let's just make sure that Toad agrees. There are no, see how this came up with 0? There are no records in either one of them. And so when I run this, Alakazam, because this is a magic show. Come on, there we go. And now, when we look, refresh, I now have records, which we can now see. So, as long as I have a source system expert, because let's face it, it's not magic, okay? I don't have Biml script that can look at any database in the world and go, hey, this is where the sales stuff is, right? As long as I have a source system expert who can assist with the queries, I can build a table lickety-split. And you could say, well, so what? I could have done a select into or something and done that. But wait, there's more. Let's do the second iteration. So we've loaded this thing as a single table. And this is what most people's first shot at a data warehouse actually looks like, right? They do exports of tables and they set them up nightly and they walk away and they make all these little siloed things, right? And you could draw this out into pivot tables and whatnot. But we've delivered our metrics. Well, let's deliver some more. So now I go to the next query, which is going to drop and recreate the database. It's going to create a dim customer, just a very simple rudimentary one. And down here is dim product. And, oh, I probably should pause longer. I forget that we're doing this over the internet. So we have a dim product, and then all of its extended properties. And here's your fact sales order details with the foreign keys and its extended properties. And down here is where you would get your foreign key constraints. All right, and then I have some queries down here. So let's run that. Watch how fast this is. I'm not going to turn off anything. I'm going to allow those to continue to run live, and I'm just going to run this again. And it's going to say, are you sure you want to overwrite that table? Yes, I do, because I'm going to import the other tables that are related to it. And now, if you ignore the tables, I now have two dimensions. Here's dim customer. There's a dim product. And there's your fact sales order details. And you could say, well, so what? Well, you'll see that I still have the create interim tables and user views. And I have this load for the fact table. We'll get to that in a minute. But I don't have packages for the dimensions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's just reset this and do a refresh so that you know that there's nothing up my sleeve. Right now all I have is that fact table and the two dimensions. And in fact, I could do a database diagram drag the fact table out there, and you'll see that it'll bring the dimensions in there. I hope you guys can see that on your screen. It's actually doing so because of the foreign keys, but for some reason at this resolution it's not showing the lines. I mean, they're there, but it's not showing them. So this is indeed what's in there. I'm going to go back to my Biml script, and I'm just simply going to tell it to run this. We can open it really quick, and you'll see that it is full of interim tables and user views. Build and run. Now in Bids Helper, you would be highlighting multiple Biml script files at a time and telling it to generate the packages. And then when it generated the package, you'd run the package. Okay, so this is done. Let us go back and verify. Refresh. Now remember what I've done. I haven't done anything other than re-import those new tables with their metadata. I'm going to go over here to my handy-dandy full SCD packages, SCD dim package loads, turn it to live, and now suddenly I have these loads. And we open it, and I'm going to minimize this so you can see this better. And you have, once again, a truncate, a data flow, and then the merge statement, which I didn't write. It wrote it. Your merge statement is right here. I didn't write it. It wrote it. However, we don't want to be in a situation where we have to run these packages separately, right? We'd like to have a master package. So I have a very simple master package here. I actually have really cool stuff that I use that dynamically generates the master package. In this case, where is it? Here we go. Let's make this one live. And all this is going to do is do the dimensions before the facts. So if I open this, it's execute package tasks, and it just simply does the dimensions before it does the facts, because the facts, are typically loaded after the dimensions. Now I have another one that I'm perfecting that will take even a highly complex data warehouse with snowflakes and all this, and from the foreign keys determine exactly what the precedence constraints have to be so that everything runs exactly as early as it possibly could. Now, in this case, let's now go back and look at our load for our fact load, because now we have lookups we have to do. Oh, actually we don't. It did it for us. There's the lookup for your customer surrogate key. There's the lookup for your product key. And then your derived column that replaces unknown lookups with -1. This is a standard pattern that people see over and over and over again in their warehouse. And this was generated from nothing more than the metadata. That's it. So what you find is you get to a place where you can build and load a data warehouse as fast as you can draw the boxes and lines. So let me just run out the support structures here. Build and run. And that was the views and the interim tables. And let's just look really quick as we refresh. Where is it? There we go. So now you have a bunch of tables with 0 records, but you have your interims, and you also have your star schema user views. But whenever you do the -1 pattern, you also have to account for the unknown, right? So if I were to I have to have that unknown -1 record, right? Well, those are a pain to write. A lot of people write those every time. I don't do that. I generate them. So where is it? Insert unknown member dimension records. I make that live, And my C# code goes, oh, okay. Based on data type and other things, I'll write those statements for you, and they turn into execute sequence or SQL tasks. And just for grins, you can see the code. If not exists, select blah, 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 where product key equals -1, then set identity and insert on, and insert those unknown values in there. Now remember, this is a very simple demo. I could be working with 100 tables. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, it might take a little bit longer to compile this. Instead of 4 seconds, it might take 12 seconds or something. But if you made a change in your warehouse, or made a change, if you were going to iterate through this thing rapidly, you can make these changes by making the changes to the source query and the metadata, and that's it. So now let's go, and I'm going to, just because I'm paranoid, go through here and delete these again. This is what we've been generating over and over and over again. I'm just going to clean that out. I can't because it's running. Try again. Okay. Now let's go and build this whole thing, and hopefully it does. Hopefully I haven't made a misstep while I was talking. Come on. Yeah, the more RAM you have, the faster this runs. This little Ultrabook only has 4 gigs of RAM, and I'm running a lot of software on it. All right, so if I go back and I open SSDT, and I maneuver back to that folder, open project, it's in the output folder. See, this is the demo folder for the MIST project, and this is the output, and that's where it puts all of those things. I could, if I wanted to, open this one, which is the creator of those tables and views, but we've already done that. Let's open the ETL. Now, these are all separate packages, but really the package that I care about is this one. And then when let's go back and do nothing up my sleeve again. So as I go over here and I say refresh item, now I have one record in each one of these because it's the unknown record. Is it done? There we go. Ta-da! Okay, so then I go over here, and I'm going to refresh, and now suddenly I have records, right? And then I'm going to go down here and just highlight some of these things here, just to run them. And this is your fact right here. You'll see that it correctly picked up its keys from the dimensions. There's your unknown record. Now, the views are also there. I didn't run the queries, but we can. The views are also there, and they work. Now, did anybody see the spelling mistake I have here? Customer tip. See that? Now, how often have you seen those little mistakes, right? Where, I misspelled something, or there's something that's spelled differently in the source and you missed that up or whatever, right? Well, let's just go there and fix that. So if I go back over here, it's almost as if I made that mistake on purpose. And I do a rename, and I'm just simply going to rename it to customer type. That's it. That's it. Now watch. This is money right here. I'm going to reload. I'm only going to reload this. We'll overwrite all of them, but we don't have to. We only really have to overwrite dim customer. This is kind of like the third iteration because I could have, let's make two changes. So we did customer type, right? But let's go into dim customer to make sure it took. Now it's customer type. See that? I'm going to go over here, highlight this, go into the annotations. Now I should be doing this in the model. I'm cheating here. I tend to go from the model backwards. I am a dimensional modeler. A lot of people who are more ETL minded will start in staging and build forward. I build backwards. So I'm going to change this to type 2. Now, as soon as I did that, it fixed everything. Right now, if you look at my interim table for dim customer, it's fixed. The star view is fixed right here. If you go down to the load, if I had showed you the load before I changed that from type 1 to type 2, you would know that the merge statement here properly dealt with it. See this first line on my merge statement? This is actually just C# that I do. The type 1 columns for this table, there's one of them, and type 2 columns, there's one of them. And then that affects, based on variables, how my merge statements run. Well, if I were to go back and say, well, you know, dim customer, I was wrong. Customer type should only be, where is it? I really meant it was type 1. Type 1. But, let's have a little fun. But, I don't want to include it in the user view. Now remember, since I'm importing my things from the database, I really should be making these changes in the modeling tool, but I'm not taking the time to open the modeling tool in front of you. So now, if I do this and I just save that, now if I go back to the load customer thing here, and I go down to the merge, now suddenly my diagnostic statement says, oh, I have 2 type 1 fields and 0 type 2 fields, and it changes how it runs. And if I go back up to my user view for dim customer, you will notice that it is now missing customer type. This is money. You can go in here and change things at will. And as long as they're supported via the source product, meaning the stored procedure or the view or whatever you're running it on, it literally follows. It's like Despicable Me 2. You have minions. And it literally works. And so I just made those things on the fly, right? I haven't rehearsed this part. Oh, okay, well, I'll go in here and I'll just run this, recreate the build and run. I'm going to close this first. Build and run. Just to redo my, I have to do my plumbing again, so I have to do those tables again. The interims and the views, good. And just for good measure, I'm going to go in there and I'm worried about something. Did I clear these? I don't remember if I did or not. Refresh. Yeah, that wouldn't be much to look at. That would not be much to look at. Let me delete those a second. Delete dbo.dim customer. To delete them in the wrong order, or in the I use foreign keys, so that would fail. Factor order details. And although I could just continue to do it with a merge and it would merge properly anyway, but it's more impressive if it actually loads. Dim product. Okay. So let's go here, run this one. Boom. Delete. I thought I could say from fact. Oh, see, this is why you shouldn't write code. If I had had my Biml script do it, it would have been right. And good. So nothing up my sleeve, right? Come on. Fresh item, 0. Let's run our insert unknown dim records for a moment. Build and run. Bada boom, bada bing. Come on. There we go. Good. Refresh. Boom. And you will notice that I really meant to refresh. Come on. I did that, didn't I? Didn't I refresh that? I think this is a Toad error. I don't think this is. Oh, yeah, it is. All right, so it's there. Customer type. Okay. So, but I have the 2 unknown records, right? And let us go and rebuild. Build the whole thing. And like magic, and now imagine if I had made that change and we had source control. I'd have to go into the model, change the table, check it out of the model, change the table, put it back in. I'd have to open the interim table, check it out of the model, change that, put it back in. I'd have to change the merge statement and check that back in. I would also have to open the package, play the metadata dance that we also know and love, where even if you don't really change anything, it still wants you to update everything and make it feel happy, and then check that back in. And if I was doing cubes, I'd have to do those separately. And I'd have to do the view. I don't remember if I said that. I'd have to check the view out and check the view back in, and I would have to do it all in the right order, because you can't change the view without changing the table, because it is referenced by the view. So what you rapidly see is the framework, the C# that I've written, untangles most of that mess like magic. And this framework that I'm sharing on the web and all that stuff, this is the simple stuff. This is the simple stuff because it's the easiest stuff for people to understand, to grasp, and to run with. And then they can go off and build their own skyscrapers and all that. Biml and Biml script is literally changing the game. And if you do ETL for a living, you're not going to be spending weeks fixing 100 packages anymore. You're going to have to find something to do with your time. So you either grow, perhaps you want to learn to do Biml script, or do something else, become a reporting expert or do something else, because I could have just as easily had gone the next step and done this to cubes. This is literally going to change the way we do work, our work. So all of this code is going to be up on the blog with some comments and explanations of here's a for each, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm calling this method which is created, blah, 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 blah. Because I just think that it's a much better place to try and explain that. But nothing will remain hidden in the magic. It'll all be there. And all you have to do is just follow the blog.
Hey,
So,
question.
yeah, go ahead. If I can hear you.
Sure. I may have missed it in there, but when you did that column name change, I missed the magic of the very last step. How did the data warehouse column name get updated? Did you have to do that piece at least manually?
All I did was, that's why I had this statement waiting right here.
Oh,
SP rename this customer type to customer type. And
okay.
that's all I had to do. Now, in my world and the way I do this, I would have opened my modeling program, changed it there, and then regenerated the DDL and gotten my Biml script. You don't have to do it the way I do with that whole multi-step process. The reason I did that was because I'm a consultant, and so I never know what modeling tool somebody's going to have, and I can't count on. Have you guys ever worked in a situation where people have deleted tables that they didn't know what they were for, and they might have been your metadata tables, right? So I put it in the model, that goes to the extended properties, and then I have the script that brings it in as Biml tags. The Biml tags, the annotation tags, if we were to go through some of the script, and I will be on the blog, you will see why I'm using the annotation tags rather than simply reading them from a metadata table. It makes the code so much easier to read and so much more elegant. So that's why I go through that multi-step process. I also have code that's not quite ready for prime time that if I make the changes to the Biml script, it will make the changes going backwards back to the database, and then I can import them into the modeling tool.
Wow.
So it's kind of like going back and forth, right? But I chose that step because as long as I have a tool that will make extended properties, I can make it work with my Biml. So did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else before I go back to the PowerPoints? We can, of course, answer more questions at the end if you want. Or is everybody shell-shocked? Okay. Well, let's go back to the PowerPoints. Oops. Okay, so the next steps, follow the blog. I'm blogging a lot about Biml, and I'm going to be pulling apart all these things. The next article will be, I did the article on Biml syntax and basics, and in that I used that environment file, and I explained why I did that. The environment file was the one that made the connections in the databases and the schemas. And then in the next one I will be talking about annotation tags and what they mean in Dave Stein's world. And then we will introduce the other scripts that import those things. And so that way when you're reading through these things, you'll see, blah, 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 where an annotation tag, get tag, column role equals BK. You'll understand what that means. It means I'm looking for the business key of the table. And then when I get there, then I'll start showing, here's my type 2 pattern. Here's the fact pattern. I have a very simple, very kind of elegant junk dimension pattern that I do. And the beautiful thing is you don't have to do it my way. Everybody's welcome to do whatever they want. This is not data warehousing in a box. You don't buy something and are forced to follow a set path because some programmer decided that's what it was going to do. I'm trying to do my thing in a way that's kind of neutral, so that way if you understand my annotation tags, then you can do whatever you want. You can read the code and say, I want to use tables instead, and then set it up to loop through the tables with the same basic logic. But follow the blog. Andy Leonard is on step 4 of the Stairway to Biml. It's a good series. Bimlscript.com is the site that Verigen chooses for its community, and it's free to belong, and there's a forum, and there are some snippets, and the snippets that are the code pieces that I'll be putting up on the blog and explaining, I will also put up on Bimlscript with a link back to the blog for the explanation, because most people are not going to be able to look at the Bimlscript and go, oh, I get everything, that's fine. They'll want the explanation that's on the blog. And since we started out with the matrix, we'll end with the matrix. Trying to schedule a Biml workshop in Dallas. I'm hoping by the end of the year. The problem is the time of the year and holidays and all that. I've got a company who's going to sponsor it, so I may be able to give it completely for free. I'm also looking at doing one down in Austin, and I'm interested in doing one up north. Well, up north. You guys are north of us, right? Up near you folks, maybe in Oklahoma City, if we can find a venue, and we can do it. It'd be a full-day workshop where we actually do some of the stuff that we did here, but we pull apart scripts and we talk about patterns and how to code in such a way that's easier to error-proof and things like that, and make code that's easier to copy and paste from one place to the other so it works. Lots of topics that would really jumpstart people down this process. I really feel this is the way it's going, and I really feel that if you stick with SSIS the way it is, or SSAS for that matter, you're going to be eclipsed. You're going to be passed. You have a situation where a person with a good Biml script framework is as efficient, as productive as 5 or 6 regular people. I mean good people, because their script does most of the work for them. So if anybody's interested in having a workshop, maybe we can find a place to do it up there, and I can come up for a day and we can do it. I'm always asked for more of my contact information at the end, so I'll leave that up. That's Brandon Ash. He's one of the guys here in Dallas, and he went to his first summit. We took a picture. He's the good-looking one with the hair. That's my email address, my blog, and Twitter, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you folks have that I can.
Anybody have any questions?
So I either bored everybody to death or they're scared. They're afraid to ask questions.
Nope, looks good.
All right, well, thank you, folks.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
That was excellent. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.
Go ahead.